Welcome to Echoed Enigmas, where shadows whisper truths.
Tonight, we're diving into another unsettling case, a story that still leaves questions unanswered. I suggest you stay with me all the way to the end, because what happened next, no one was prepared for. Let's begin.
The last bus out of Harlan County dropped me at the Millhaven Crossroads at 11:15 on a Tuesday night in January. And I want to say right now, before I tell you the rest of it, that I am not the kind of person who believes in things that don't have explanations. I'm a systems analyst. I fix problems with logic and process. I have never once in 34 years of living walked into a situation I couldn't eventually diagram on a whiteboard. I'm telling you that so you understand what it cost me to believe what happened next. I'd missed the last connecting train out of Harlan because I'd been too precious about it, too good to stand in the aisle with the evening commuters, too comfortable in my window seat on the express, half asleep with my forehead against the glass, watching the Indiana flatlands blur past like a gray watercolor someone hadn't finished. So I'd let two earlier buses go and taken the late one. The kind of small, stupid vanity that you replay obsessively afterward, wondering if a different version of yourself, a less comfortable, more sensible version, would have caught the 8:47 and been home by 10 with the porch light on and a beer in his hand. But that version of me didn't exist that night. Just this one, standing at the crossroads with a duffel bag, watching the bus's taillights shrink and dissolve into the black.
Millhaven Crossroads is the kind of place that exists in the negative space between actual towns. A coin laundry, a gas station, a Subway restaurant, all of them shut at this hour, their signs humming dimly like they'd forgotten anyone had turned them on. My family's farmhouse was about 4 miles northeast, down Coldwater Road, through a stretch of what used to be working farmland before the Breckenridge consolidation bought up the plots in the 90s and let most of it go fallow. You pass two smaller rural neighborhoods, Kettle Fork and the old Simmons development, and then a long, wide-open tract of dead agricultural land before the tree line that marks the edge of my parents' property. On a normal night, in a car, it's nothing. 8 minutes with the radio on. On foot, in January at 11:15 at night, the math becomes considerably more hostile. But there was Terry Dowd's place, halfway down the main road, where half the township kept their spare vehicles. Terry was retired, ex-postal service, and rented out spaces in his long gravel lot for $20 a month, mostly farm trucks, motorcycles, a few beaten-up sedans whose owners used them only on weekends. My father kept an old Trek mountain bike there, chained to a post near the side fence, because he rode it to the bait shop in Kettle Fork on Saturday mornings and didn't trust himself not to leave it somewhere. I knew where the spare key was. Terry wouldn't mind. I'd explain in the morning.
I walked to Terry's in about 10 minutes, the cold working its way through my jacket collar with the patient, methodical thoroughness of something that has all night and knows it. The temperature had dropped hard since sundown, that particular January cold that doesn't feel like weather so much as a deliberate personal hostility, as if the air itself has decided you specifically. I pulled my scarf up over my chin and tilted my head down and walked. Terry's place was dark, all the lights off, the truck in the driveway, a blue television glow coming from behind the upstairs curtain. I almost knocked, and then didn't. It was nearly 11:30. Terry was 67 and had a bad hip. I found the spare key in its magnetic case under the lip of the gatepost, got my father's Trek unchained in about 40 seconds, left a brief apologetic text on Terry's phone, knowing he'd see it in the morning and wave it off, and set out down Coldwater Road. The bike's tires were slightly soft, which meant every rotation had a faint, rhythmic complaint to it.
a dull, repeated thump against the asphalt that became, after a few minutes, the only sound in the world. The road out here had no streetlights. My phone's flashlight pointed a pale yellow cone about 15 feet ahead of me. On either side, the frozen fields absorbed the darkness and gave nothing back. Not the darkness of a room where the light's been switched off, but the deeper, more architectural darkness of a place that has never really been lit to begin with, that exists in a fundamentally different relationship with illumination than the places where people actually live. I was about 2 miles in, just past the Kettle Fork turn, when I noticed the cold had changed. I want to be precise about this because I know how it sounds. The ambient temperature hadn't dropped. It had already been savage, already the kind of cold that numbs the fingertips inside their gloves and makes the inside of your nose feel like the walls of a freezer. What changed was localized, specific. There was warmth where my left shoulder met my neck, and then there was a sudden, complete absence of warmth there that was qualitatively different from the surrounding cold. The way a shadow isn't just less light, it has a quality to it, a texture, a presence. I felt a hand on my shoulder. Not a pressure, not a brush, a hand, distinct, deliberate, cold enough that I felt it through my jacket and the 2 layers beneath it. Cold in the way that metal left outside in winter is cold. Cold in the way that suggests the thing generating it has no warmth of its own to offer. I don't know exactly what sound I made, something between a shout and a dry heave. I went off the bike sideways and hit the road shoulder with my hip and elbow, and the bike clattered down beside me, and I was on my feet in approximately 1 second, spinning around with the phone light cutting wild arcs through the dark, and there was nothing there. Just the road, just the fields, just the thin, papery sound of the wind through the dead grass on either side. I stood there for a long time, or what felt like a long time. It might have been 15 seconds, with my heart doing something industrial and complicated in my chest, and my breath coming out in hard white puffs. I pointed the light in every direction. I called out. My voice came back flat and small and wrong-sounding, the way voices do when there's nothing around to reflect them. No walls, no trees, no surfaces with any interest in what you have to say. "Hello?" I said. And then, because it seemed important to establish dominance I absolutely did not feel, "Who's there?" The wind moved the grass. That was all. And then, from somewhere that was not quite at my left ear but was not quite anywhere else either, from a location that my brain kept trying to triangulate and kept failing, a voice said, "Keep riding. Don't stop. I won't hurt you." A pause. I felt the cold enter my ear canal and move inward, and with it came a smell, the deep, wet mineral smell of disturbed earth, of soil that's been opened up and hasn't properly closed again, like the air at the edge of a fresh grave. "Don't stop," it said again, "but if you do..." It didn't finish the sentence. It didn't need to. I got back on the bike. I want to be honest. There was a version of me, the sensible, whiteboard diagrams version, that was already constructing explanations. Auditory hallucination triggered by cold-induced oxygen disruption, hypervigilant nervous system response to isolation and low temperature, hypnagogic intrusion from the near sleep state on the bus. These are real phenomena. I know their names. I was mentally labeling them as I climbed back onto the track and started pedaling, and I was doing it because naming things is how I cope, and I was coping as hard as I possibly could. But the hand came back. Both hands this time, left shoulder and right side, simultaneously, and the cold of them was extraordinary. Not painful exactly, but total, like being gripped by something that existed at a temperature that had no business being alive. The muscles beneath the points of contact locked up. Not cramped, locked, as if the nerve signals were being rerouted. I could still pedal, but I could no longer control the direction. My hands were on the handlebars and I was steering, but the bike was not going where I was steering it. Something was holding me. Something was steering me. We, and I use that word deliberately because that is how it felt, a collaboration I had not consented to, turned left at the old Breckenridge access road. I knew this turn. It ran south for about half a mile before it dead-ended at what locals called Mercy Field, 12 acres of fallow farmland around an old Breckenridge structure that had been, at various points in its history, a grain storage facility, a small-scale biofuel processing plant, and, for about 2 years in the early 2000s, an improperly permitted rural cremation operation that had lost its license after a series of regulatory violations no one around here ever talked about very specifically. The building was gone now, demolished in 2009, the lot graded, but the field had a reputation. Kids dared each other to cross it at night. Adults took the long way around without being able to say precisely why. My grandmother, who was from this county and had never in her life expressed a supernatural belief of any kind, referred to it only as that place and changed the subject if you pressed her. I had grown up with this. I had filed it under rural folklore and the psychological residue of community trauma. I had a whole filing cabinet in my head for things like that. The bike moved into the access road, and I could not stop it, and the smell was everywhere now. Earth and something older than earth, something that had been underground long enough to forget what the surface looked like. Mercy Field, at night in January, is a space that defeats the ordinary geometry of open land. It should be simple, flat, empty, measurable.
You should be able to look across it and see the far tree line and perform the basic arithmetic of distance. But what I saw instead, when the bike stopped at the field's edge and I was released, the hands simply gone between one breath and the next, was a field that seemed to breathe. Not visibly, not demonstrably, but the dead grass moved in a way that had no relationship to the direction of the wind, and the dark in the middle of the field was several shades darker than the dark at its edges, and from somewhere in the trees on the far boundary came a sound that I can only describe as many voices speaking in a register just below the threshold of language, the way you can tell a crowd is talking without being able to make out a single word. The branches of the old oaks at the field's edge began to move, not sway, move purposefully, like fingers uncurling, and the flat, frost-hardened ground of the field developed seams, fractures, running out from some central invisible point like cracks in ice, fast and branching and multiplying, and the sound they made was the sound of something that has been held together a very long time, finally expressing an opinion about that. I dropped the bike and ran. I ran the half-mile back to Coldwater Road and the remaining mile and a half to the farmhouse without stopping, without looking back. And when I tell you I don't know what was behind me, I mean that I made a deliberate, conscious, survival-oriented decision not to find out. I know what curiosity costs in these situations. I had already paid enough. I got inside. I washed my face and hands at the kitchen sink. There was no real reason for this, it just seemed necessary. And I went to bed and lay there with a temperature of 104.8 and every muscle in my body screaming in a language that was mostly the word cold. And I did not sleep for a very long time. In the morning, I felt fine.
This is the part I keep returning to. The fever was gone, the muscle pain was gone. I ate scrambled eggs at my parents' kitchen table and drank 2 cups of coffee and told my mother I'd gotten in late, and she said, "You look peaky," in that way she has that is both accurate and insufficient. I went back down Coldwater Road that afternoon to retrieve the bike. Broad daylight, clear sky, the pale, flat light of a January afternoon making everything look harmless and slightly embarrassed about it. I turned down the access road toward Mercy Field. The field was exactly what it had always been: flat, fallow, the dead grass unmoved, the ground unbroken, the tree line at the far edge just standing there being a tree line. I walked to the center of it and stood there for a long time with my hands in my pockets, turning slowly, looking for something, a crack in the ground, a scorch mark, any physical evidence that the night before had left a receipt. There was nothing. The field had the blank, patient look of a place that has absolutely no comment to make. The bike was where I dropped it, at the field's edge. One of the handlebars had a slight, inexplicable bend in it that I couldn't straighten, even bracing it against my knee. I wheeled it back to the road. I was almost at the Coldwater Road junction when I stopped. At the edge of the field, where the access road's gravel gave out and the dead grass began, there was a section of fence post, old, rotted, half sunk into the frozen ground. Wound around the base of it, in the pale winter light, was a growth of frost-killed weeds that had taken a shape in dying that I found difficult to look at directly and difficult to stop looking at. They were bent in the shape of 2 hands. Left and right, side by side, the stems curved inward at exactly the angle and spacing of a grip, the kind of grip that goes around a person's shoulder and side. The frost had set them rigid. They'd been holding that shape for some time. I took a picture with my phone. When I got home and looked at it, the image was slightly overexposed in the area of the hands, blown out, whited over, as though the light from somewhere I couldn't see had gotten into the frame. I deleted it. I have not gone back.